I'm Herman Faust, and this is Enjoy It While It Lasts. Today's episode, what Cinco de Mayo is really about. Enjoy. Growing up, it felt like you had some insider knowledge if you were aware that Cinco de Mayo was not Mexican Independence Day. That was a fun fact you could pull out to wow people and get people curious about it because that's pretty much what a lot of people thought and maybe still think that Cinco de Mayo represents. Those same people would be even more shocked when they find out that it's not really a holiday that's celebrated widely in Mexico at all. I don't think that anything about the day is ever taught in school. I couldn't remember anything. I asked my wife, and she couldn't remember anything as well. The only thing both of us kind of have memories of as students is in art class. Maybe we would be coloring sombreros, or at some point we might be shown a video of a ballet folklore performance. So not only were we not taught about the day itself, we weren't even really taught about Mexican culture. We were just kind of given the aesthetics of the culture. Besides not being taught a lot about it in school, also just it was not a thing culturally around us. And I grew up in Oak Cliff, a predominantly Hispanic neighborhood. I was around lots of Mexican immigrant families, and none of them really had a thing about it. I remember it always felt like just a day for white people to cosplay as Mexican stereotypes and an excuse to drink margaritas and have tacos be on special discount at different restaurants. So that's why we're here today. I want to first look at the actual history of the day, why Cinco de Mayo is a day to begin with, and then look at how it became this United States holiday that somewhat parodies a culture instead of actually teaches about it. To learn about the origin of the day, we go back to the year 1861. Mexico has just come out of a 2-year civil war and is reeling as a nation and also broke as a nation. President Benito Juarez decided to suspend payments on all foreign debts at the time. This gained the attention of Britain, Spain, and France. They took exception to the idea that he said that he was not going to be making payments anymore. And each country sent a naval fleet to Mexico to basically check them and demand payments. Juarez ended up cutting a deal with Britain and Spain, which was enough for them to go ahead and remove their forces. France had other ideas, though. Napoleon was in charge at this time, and he was looking at Mexico as a potential colony to give France a stronghold in North America. He recognized the opportunity existed because the United States was in the midst of their own civil war at the time. So they were in no position to help the Mexican government fight off France. Napoleon also planned that by taking over Mexico and installing the French puppet government that he intended to, that Napoleon would be able to supply guns and ammunitions to the Confederacy in exchange for Southern cotton. And at this point, cotton was a scarce commodity in Europe because of the Union's shipping blockades. Not to mention the fact that if the Confederacy was successful in the Civil War, and it was in large part due to France's contributions to them, that would give Napoleon another ally in the Americas. So when you put those things together, while Britain and Spain were just trying to intimidate to collect debt, France was looking at this as an opportunity to change the balance of power in the Western Hemisphere while the United States was distracted. Napoleon sends an initial force of 6,500 men, commanded by General Charles de Lorenzes, with the intention of capturing Mexico City. At this point in time, the French military is widely considered to be the strongest fighting force in the world. They are battle tested, extremely well armed, and supremely confident. They pretty much roll over the early resistance that they faced to capture Orizaba. The Mexican forces were led by General Zaragoza. Zaragoza had played a key role in defeating the dictator Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. He fought in key battles such as the Battle of Guadalajara and the Battle of Calpulalpan. He then went on to serve as the Minister of War and Navy before resigning to take active command in the field. He also was known for dressing in a black civilian suit rather than a military uniform, and was described as more a young professor than a general. He was originally born in Texas and had actually just suffered losing his wife. She died just months before the French invasion started. This is who was in charge of the Mexican defense against Napoleon's army. They had a total of around 4,500 to 5,500 troops, but they were mixed between regular army units, National Guard militia, and also very rushed recruiting of civilians. Their weapons were also outdated. They carried a variety of muskets and outdated flintlocks, weapons like the Brown Bess, which were already considered out of date and basically a relic at this point. The situation was made even worse when an arms depot accidentally detonated, killing hundreds of soldiers and civilians and wiping out most of Zaragoza's ammunition reserves. Compared with the French having more modern rifles, pistols, carbines, bayonets, and cannons, as well as having the Zouave among their ranks, which was the elite French military troops at the time. Zaragoza knew he was outmanned, outtrained, and outgunned. So he tried to cut the French attack off at a mountain pass that was the only roadway inland, Cumbres de Acusingo. He attempted to hold the pass with 4,000 of his men. However, the Zouave come over the summit, and in a 3-hour fight, the French forces are able to force Zaragoza out of the pass. The Zouave only suffered 2 deaths and 36 wounded. At this point, Lorenzes felt even more confident than when he came into Mexico. He writes to Napoleon that we are so superior to Mexicans in organization, race, and refinement of manners that I am pleased to announce to His Imperial Majesty that from this moment on, as the leader of my 6,000 brave soldiers, I can consider myself the owner of Mexico. This was probably Lorenz's first major mistake. Napoleon originally had promised to send an extra 10,000 troops, and those never came. It's not for sure known if that is in direct response to the letter from Lorenzes, but I can assume that it tilted Napoleon's decision to not send them after reading just how strongly in control Lorenzes felt that he was already. Zaragoza, for his part, then had to march his troops 65 miles to Puebla, immediately following the battle and their loss in the mountain pass. They arrived at a fort that was neglected. They had to dig trenches and build breastworks, and only had 2 days to do so. Puebla was the last city that stood between the French troops and Mexico City. Lawrence's had some advisors try to convince him to march around the city and go directly to Mexico City. The tactical reason not to do this is, of course, you don't want a defended armed force at your rear that could surround you or also cut off your supply lines. The deeper reason for why he didn't do this is basically ego. He had already felt like his forces were so superior that the Mexican resistance really provided no threat to him. He also believed that because of the city's clerical influence and the bishops that they had there, that the 80,000 inhabitants would basically welcome the French once they showed force. He wasn't taking it necessarily because he saw it as a tactical necessity, but more of a demonstration to show France's power. He thought it was going to be easy and also a symbolic victory, and that the people there would be praising him for doing so. The Mexican men that were in Puebla were not only underarmed, they were underfed. The lack of supplies also meant they had a lack of rations. So they were about to go into another battle against the most decorated army in the world while hungry. Like I said before, they did try to fortify Puebla, but Zaragoza had to make a plan because he figured that eventually the French forces would overcome any defensive strategy. So he assigned about 1,100 men to hold the northern forts, and he kept the remaining 3,500 men back. And his plan was to send them to envelop the enemy in a counterattack once Lorenz's committed to an all-out assault, basically trying to set a trap. With all of the advantages the French military had, if Lorenz's would have made the smart plays, they probably would have eventually won out no matter what Zaragoza did. On May 5th, when they first arrive, Lorenz's starts by shelling Fort Guadalupe from about 2,000 meters out. And this is well beyond the range of the Mexican guns. However, out of old habit, he orders them to move closer. And this new position gives them a worse angle. By midday, they've burned through more than half of their ammunitions and have made almost no impact at all on the old stone walls. At about 11:30, he decides to send in the Zouave. They drop their backpacks at the base of the hill and begin climbing toward Fort Guadalupe in columns, carrying artillery with them. The terrain is steep, and there is a series of charges into the Mexican fortified positions. The French approach between the two forts, and they come under crossfire and are forced to retreat. Then they try a second, more forceful attack from the east and the north that also fails. On the third attempt, the French artillery has completely run out of ammunition. So the infantry is now climbing up the hill with no fire support. There is one French soldier that actually does make it and scales the walls of Fort Guadalupe and plants the French flag. He is killed almost immediately after, and the flag is torn down. However, seeing the forces come up over the wall did have an effect on the Mexican battalion inside. They broke ranks and started to flee, leaving the gunners on the fort as the only defense. This type of panic, of course, is due to the fact that they are undertrained, that a lot of these forces are civilians that were hastily recruited. A officer named Ariate was able to stop the men and rally them to return to their positions before the French forces are able to exploit the opening. Then we get an act of God, and it starts to storm. Heavy rain is falling on the slopes, and the ground turns into mud. This makes the French trek up the hill even more difficult. As they've been turned away 3 times, they are sliding as they try to go up and have no artillery backing them up. Then they try one more assault that ends up being their final assault because Zaragoza springs his trap. He orders his cavalry on both flanks to charge simultaneously. The French were already in a retreat formation from the assault that was being pushed back, and they formed defensive squares to protect their own withdrawal. This is where Lawrence's mistake on the local support really hurts him the most, because local Zacapoashta forces that are native to Puebla, they start flanking the counterattacks and disrupt the French formation, causing massive confusion in their ranks. The French are forced to retreat completely. They suffered approximately 476 casualties on the day, and the Mexicans lost fewer than 100. Zaragoza sends a telegram to President Juarez, who was waiting in Mexico City, telling him that the enemy has showered us with grenades. Their columns attacking the Loreto and Guadalupe hills have been repelled. Then their columns retreated, and our forces advanced towards them. The night after the battle, defeated French troops reported hearing Mexicans celebrating, cheering, and singing Marseillaise. That was France's own revolutionary anthem that Napoleon had banned in France, actually. So they were singing their country's own revolutionary anthem back at the army that was just trying to conquer them. And that is the story of why any celebration exists on May 5th, what Cinco de Mayo is actually about. A smaller force that was ill-equipped, pushing back the world's most formidable army. This battle, unfortunately for Mexico, did not end the French assault. Mexico did celebrate in the immediate aftermath, and the city of Puebla de los Angeles is renamed Puebla de Zaragoza. Unfortunately, he doesn't get to enjoy being honored long. Just 4 months after the battle, Zaragoza died of typhoid fever at the age of 33. Napoleon took the defeat as a challenge to France's national honor. He fired Lawrence's and sent an additional 29,000 men under a new commander, General Faure. With the much larger force, they were able to lay siege to Puebla and exhausted them of ammunition and food, forcing the Mexican defenders to surrender, where most of them were sent to France as prisoners. French forces then went on to push into Mexico City. Juarez's government is forced into exile, and the Second Mexican Empire is established with Habsburg Archduke Maximilian as emperor. However, the first initial victory at the Battle of Puebla was not meaningless simply because France came back. Historians contend that the year long delay caused by the defeat gave Lincoln's generals in the United States enough time to win decisive victories for the Union so that by the time Napoleon was in position, him helping the Confederacy with upgraded artillery and ammunitions was basically pointless at that time. After the Confederacy surrendered, the United States was then able to turn its attention to help support Juarez's republic, and they invoked the Monroe Doctrine, making it clear that they would not tolerate any lasting French presence on the continent. Napoleon was then facing rising military threats back in Europe and saw his plan had failed to establish a stronghold in North America, so he withdrew his troops. However, he left Maximilian behind. That led to Maximilian being captured and executed by a firing squad. Juarez was able to reoccupy Mexico City and reestablish the Republic. So that initial victory at the Battle of Puebla may have led to the United States being able to defeat the Confederacy, at least made them have an easier time of it without the Confederacy getting the help of French artillery. And that in turn may have led to the United States being able to help Mexico expel French forces out of Mexican borders eventually. President Juarez declared May 5th a national holiday just 4 days after the victory. But the significance of the day has been uneven, let's say. Porfirio Diaz fought at the Battle of Puebla, and he eventually became president and then dictator of Mexico. And during his time in power, he used Cinco de Mayo as a celebration of his own power and his reign. When he was deposed in the Mexican Revolution, the holiday's standing largely collapsed. Today, Cinco de Mayo is not a national holiday in Mexico anymore. It's only an official holiday in the state of Puebla and the neighboring state of Veracruz. The rest of the country treats it as a civic occasion where schools close, but that's about it. In Puebla itself, the day is marked by celebrations of military parades and battle reenactments. The first American celebrations happened in California in 1863, just 1 year after the battle, where communities of Mexican miners organized to specifically hold celebrations for Cinco de Mayo and to raise money for the ongoing war against France. California had been a part of Mexico just 15 years prior. So these are people that are there for the gold rush, but also people that have strong Mexican roots. Their celebrations featured parades, speakers, and music. They were essentially having a civil rights commemoration where Latinos were publicly declaring where they stood in the Civil War and the French intervention, and that they supported freedom over slavery, racial equality over white supremacy, and democracy over imperial rule. All of this was tied together because of the French attempt to use the Confederacy to get its own foothold into the continent. In the 1960s, the Chicano civil rights movement embraced Cinco de Mayo as part of the broader effort to assert Mexican American identity and visibility in American society. Figures like Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta were fighting for labor rights and educational reform and political representation, and they promoted and propped up the holiday to give a sense of community using the historical moment of resistance to represent their own fight. This is the part of the holiday that actually had significant cultural meaning at the time and could still have that type of meaning today if it was leaned into a little bit more. The idea that Mexican Americans can identify with the Mexican soldiers that were fighting against your colonization and European domination. The actual celebration of culture and identity and resistance. That's the version of the holiday that would also be significant to any race, give everybody a chance to celebrate the Mexican American culture and recognize the importance of resisting the powers that be and supporting the working class. However, that version of the holiday only seemed to be alive for a brief moment in time. Like everything else, commercialization really affected the holidays starting around 1980. This is when Anheuser-Busch, Miller, and Coors all launched major marketing campaigns that was basically trying to reframe Cinco de Mayo as a Mexican St. Patrick's Day, a day of heavy drinking where marketing could be directed at Hispanic culture or where Hispanic culture's imagery can be used to market to a wider audience. And that marketing campaign worked. By 2013, $600 million worth of beer was sold in the United States for Cinco de Mayo. And that's more than Super Bowl Sunday or St. Patrick's Day. Only about 10% of Americans could describe what the holiday commemorates. In a 2020 survey, 41% of American adults still believe that Cinco de Mayo is Mexico's Independence Day. And another 19% say they're not sure. That type of misconception is not accidental. It's the direct result of deliberate marketing that just wanted people to feel festive and to drink instead of focusing on what the holiday originally intended. After educating myself and learning the full details of the battle and the butterfly effect consequences of the Battle of Puebla, I am personally going to look at Cinco de Mayo differently. It's going to be something that I do make sure that my kids understand and hopefully can extend them a bit of pride in their Mexican roots, in their heritage. I know that some Hispanic communities do celebrate Cinco de Mayo as exactly what I said the version of the holiday could be at its best. However, like I mentioned at the start, it's not universally celebrated this way. I do hope that someday there can be a push to educate the general public about what the actual history of the day is and what it can stand for, as opposed to the parody that it represents now. And hopefully that push in education can lead to more people finding another pride point in their own heritage. Recuerda, solo tienes una vida para vivir, así que más vale que la disfrutas mientras dure.